Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones book-to-show comparison for Season 3. In this video, I'll give my top 5 things I felt the show did better than the books, and my top 5 things I felt the books did better than the show in Season 3 of Game of Thrones. Slight spoiler warning, I don't give away anything that happened in the books that hasn't happened yet in the show, but I do highlight the differences between the books and the show, and you should have seen up to Season 3 of Game of Thrones, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So first, I'll jump right into my top 5 things I felt the show did better than the books in Season 3, that is, adaptations that I felt improved upon the source material. Number 5 is Sam and Gilly's storyline. I know a lot of people didn't like Sam and Gilly in Season 3 and 4, but I was never one of them. I always liked their storyline, just as, I found them a cute couple that I could root for, and in Season 3 I actually preferred their storyline to what was in the books. First of all, I liked how they changed the mutiny at Craster's Keep scene to make it so Sam was the one who went to Gilly and rescued her before things got really bad, as opposed to the books where Sam was crying on the floor and a couple of the older women at Craster's practically had to force him to go out with Gilly, saving both of their lives. To me, the way the show did it made me think much more highly of Sam and cheer for him. Also, I thought it set him on the right path to woo Gilly, as he was the one who saved her life. Similarly, I liked how he was the one who saved Gilly from a White Walker. In the book, Sam actually killed a White Walker earlier in the story when he was still with the Night's Watch brothers before the mutiny. And when he was with Gilly, they were attacked by the Whites, to which the Dragonglass did nothing, and they thought they were going to die until Cold Hands came in and saved them. I also thought it worked better in the show to have Sam kill the White Walker to protect Gilly rather than a Night's Watchman, since their relationship has more significance to him as a character. Plus, he made it much more powerful that he was doing it to save Gilly and not himself, and this is another moment where Sam got to be the hero as opposed to have someone else save them, which I felt added a lot to his character. Number 4 is more of the Tyrells. This refers specifically to Lady Olenna and Marjorie, who we saw a lot more of in the show than we did in the books. We only got a little bit of Marjorie in Season 2. This is the season she really started to become a main player, as we got a lot of excellent scenes with her manipulating Joffrey that weren't in the books. And as far as Lady Olenna, I think once the show got Diana Rigg to play her, they just had to make her a bigger part, because they knew she could make that part awesome, which of course she did. At times, I think they did go a bit overboard with these characters, but it was great to see them as fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters that affected the story a lot, as opposed to in the books where they barely appeared. Lady Olenna worked brilliantly with whoever she was paired with, Tyrion, Tywin, Sansa, or Varys. Every time she had her wit and dry humor, did nothing but enhance the scene. And overall, it was really great seeing more of both these characters and letting them shine more than they did in the books. Number 3 is Tyrion Lannister. Now, this could apply to any season, as I'm mainly talking about the overall character changes from book to show rather than his specific Season 3 storyline. However, I decided to include it in Season 3 because I felt there were a few moments in Season 3 that worked better with the show version of the character rather than the book character. I know that many people who had read the books first complained that they felt that the show whitewashed Tyrion's character to make him more likable and heroic, but honestly I prefer him this way. I'm not sure if that's because I saw the show first and this was the first Tyrion I got to know and got used to, or if it's because I just think it works better this way. Tyrion in the show is a much more attractive and much more likable guy. I'm sure many who were more used to the books found it hard to adjust to this change. Me personally, I think it works much better this way, and that's because it's nice to have a character you can root for, especially in the cesspool that is King's Landing, where everyone is shady in one form or another. And besides that, Tyrion in the show is still a really flawed character, and I think they perfectly blend the good and bad qualities based off the type of excellent performance that Peter Dinklage can deliver. I'm pretty sure most people would agree that Peter Dinklage is the best actor in Game of Thrones, and I like how they custom the character to fit with the actor for what he could do best, rather than trying to cram in the precise image from the source material that may or may not work in the situation that the show created. And personally, I think it works much better this way. It's particularly noticeable in season 3 because I felt the relationship he had with Sansa was completely different, whereas the Tyrion in the books was really awkward around Sansa and didn't really know how to handle her, and in some cases ended up getting really angry at her. Although, like the show, the Tyrion in the books never mistreated her and refused to consummate their marriage, I felt that in the show they had a much stronger relationship and Tyrion sympathized with her more, and this led to Sansa liking him a bit better as well. And I really personally enjoyed their relationship dynamic much better and would have liked to see more of them together, but alas, the Purple Wedding happened. Number 2 is consolidating of characters. This is something the show has done throughout. However, I particularly thought it would work well here in season 3. There have been many characters cut from the show who were in the books throughout the years. In fact, I remember before I read the books hearing from some people who had read the books and they thought that the show cut way too many characters. I don't think these people realized that in the show there were far too many characters for a TV show. And while it might be better to have so many characters in the book format, which is longer and allows for more detail, to have so many characters in the TV show format just doesn't work at all. I don't think these people were aware of how those who've never read the books perceived the show as having way too many characters, and they wanted to add more on top of that. That's just not how TV works. However, the amount of characters the books had worked for the books and the amount of characters the show had worked for the show. They're just different formats with different needs. Although I did think there were too many characters in the following books, 4 and 5, even for book format, but that's a discussion for another time. There were 2 characters in particular that were cut from season 3 that had many book readers in an uproar because they were beloved characters, but I applaud the show for having the courage to cut them out, as they would have slowed down the narrative and overall weren't really that necessary, and these characters were Strong Belwas and Cold Hands. First off, let me talk about Strong Belwas. As much as book readers love this character, and I could certainly see why, he would have been completely unnecessary to the show and would have added to the already bloated cast. The only thing he really does in the books of any significance is to kill the Marinese champion and to take a dump on him, which they easily replace with Dario taking a piss and the poison locusts, which were easily cut out altogether. Other than that, he wasn't really necessary, and anything else he does was easily given to other characters such as Jorah and Barristan. I still enjoy him in the books, and fans of him will still be able to enjoy him in the books, but he just would have gotten in the way in the show. And now let me get to Cold Hands, who I thought was really cool, and yes, the show could have had him, but as you can see, they very easily got on well without him. And you don't lose anything plot-wise by not having him. I feel because the show condensed some of these storylines and did them out of order, such as Sam returning to the wall much earlier than he did in the books, they probably wouldn't have had enough time to give Cold Hands a fair go, and he would have felt a bit rushed. So in the end, I don't think you lose anything by not having him. And then there's how they combined other characters into existing characters, such as giving Edric Storm's storyline to Gendry. And overall, I thought the season, with all the various character cuts like the Brave Companions and some of the Brotherhoods without banners, I think this show handled it very well, and it worked very well for the show. And my number one favorite thing that the show did better than the books is making the Red Wedding much more tragic. So there are several things the show did to up the tragedy of the Red Wedding. Probably the most important thing was making Robb Stark more of a main character. In the books, not only was he not a viewpoint character, he didn't even appear all that much. In fact, I would argue characters like Edmure Tully appeared more. So those who have read the books before watching season 3 may not understand that people who just watched the show and hadn't read the books were really attached to Robb Stark, and myself, really liked him, and it got up to the point of his death. I considered him one of my favorite characters, and I so badly wanted to see him defeat the Lannisters. And in the show, he had this big plan to take Castle Rock from the Lannisters, and it would have been this huge, risky, all-or-nothing type plan, and I was so excited to see it, and I really wanted to see him succeed, but instead he was just killed. Unlike the books, where his next plan was to retake the North from the Ironborn, which to me wasn't as exciting. But the main thing they did to make it more tragic was by having Talisa there. In the books, Robb Stark's wife wasn't there for the Red Wedding, nor was she established as being pregnant. In the show, they played it up with Robb and Talisa sitting by a fire, being all romantic and all like, oh, we love each other so much. Oh, and by the way, I'm pregnant. And then at the Red Wedding, Talisa saying she wanted to name their child Ned. I mean, who didn't find that touching? Cut to 2 minutes later, a phrase, frickin' stabbing her to death right in the baby-bearing gut. That was brutal, simply brutal. And then having Catelyn at the end kill Walder's teenage wife rather than his autistic nephew or whatever the hell that was also so much more brutal and showed what an asshole this guy was. And overall, I think the books do it better when it comes to logic and explaining things better, but the show does it better when it comes to emotion and ramping up the emotional cost involved. And to me, there can be no better example of this than the Red Wedding. So now I'll move on to my top 5 things I felt the books did better than the show. These are examples of where I felt the show failed to adapt the source material adequately. We'll start with my number 5, the handover of Harrenhal. So in the books, it was made very clear that Harrenhal was taken over by Roose Bolton and his troops, and when Roose abandoned Harrenhal to attend the Red Wedding and regroup with Robb Stark, he left it to the brave companions. In the show, however, the Mountain still had control of Harrenhal when Arya left, and at the start of Season 3, you see Robb Stark and Roose Bolton ready to attack Harrenhal, but instead they find a bunch of dead bodies there. I was very confused as to what happened, but first of all, let me say, when I first saw this episode, it was before I'd read the books or knew any outside material outside of what was in the show, and I didn't even realize this was the same castle that Arya was in Season 2. Someone had to explain this to me, and it also wasn't made very clear to me that Robb left Roose in charge of Harrenhal when he left for Riverrun, and that's why he was in command of it when they captured Jaime and Brienne. True, these things could have been figured out if one paid close enough attention to the dialogue in the opening intro scene that showed Harrenhal. But let's be real here. Someone who hasn't read the books isn't going to remember the name of the castle from a year ago or even be aware of who the hell Roose Bolton even is. All this may seem obvious to someone who's read the books, but that's because this is all much more clear in the books. But it took me about like a year where I had to look it up online to figure out what the hell happened at Harrenhal, because I wasn't sure if it was held by the Stark men and then attacked, or what the hell went on. But I had to read online that the Mountain was ordered to abandon Harrenhal as a strategic move, so he killed or tortured all the prisoners being held there rather than take them with him. I guess it was a good thing Arya got out of there in time. At any rate, the show did an absolute terrible job at explaining this. I don't know anyone at the time this episode aired that actually picked this up from this episode. Whereas in the books, it was much more clear on what was going on. Number 4 is the Brotherhood without banners. So this was another big head scratcher for those who hadn't read the books as to who the hell these guys were and what the hell did they want. In this show, they just seemed to appear out of nowhere, and I remember someone who had read the books explaining to me that the Brotherhood was the ones that the Lannister soldiers were looking for when they were torturing people in Season 2, that they were saying, "Where's the Brotherhood?" And honestly, I don't see how anyone who either hadn't read the books or hadn't just watched Season 2 right before watching Season 3 would be expected to remember this shit. Whereas in the books, Beric Dondarrion and the Brotherhood without banners were a major factor in all 3 books. They may not have been present until the 3rd books, but they were constantly mentioned and referenced. They were always mentioned with Tywin and Robb Stark's battle plans, and were always a presence and a factor in the War of the Five Kings. In fact, several of the Lannisters were confused about reports that Beric Dondarrion had died several times, and yet he'd still be spotted as being alive. So it was like foreshadowing this. Whereas in the show, you got this scene in season 1 where Ned Stark sends out Beric Dondarrion to kill the Mountain, and then you never see or hear anything about him again until season 3, when he's played by a totally different actor. Ain't no one going to remember that shit. That was very poorly handled. It would have benefited the show more if they had mentioned them more throughout the 2nd season, and had them be a big factor in the war in the Riverlands, just like they were in the books. That way, when they appeared in season 3, they wouldn't just seem to pop up out of nowhere and leaving everyone who hadn't read the books left wondering who the hell these guys were. Not to mention the fact that since season 3 they just disappeared entirely, whereas in the books they continued to be a factor. Number 3 is Jaime Lannister. This is in contrast to Tyrion Lannister being on my What the Show Did Better list, and in this case I feel that the books handled the overall character of Jaime Lannister better than the show, and the show kind of failed to adapt his character properly. In the books, he was barely shown in the first 2 books, just seen from other viewpoint characters' perspectives, mainly the Starks, who didn't look too kindly on him and saw him as an egotistical, self-serving man that lacked all sense of honor. But in the 3rd book, he got his own viewpoint chapters in which you saw he wasn't really that bad of a guy and had suffered from an uncaring father, and his decision to kill the Mad King was totally justified but misconstrued by others who didn't understand the full story and labeled him as a man without honor, and thus helped shape his negative disposition towards a world that despised him. Whereas in the show, they went too far out of their way to portray Jaime as a really disgusting and rotten guy, as he had a nice chat with Ned's man one day and then put a knife in his eye the next day. He threw Bran out the window trying to kill him, and worse than that, he killed his own freaking cousin just so he could escape, because in his own words, he's not suited for a life of imprisonment. Oh, poor rich boy, all aristocratic and prim and proper, can't take prison, so he has to kill his own freaking cousin? Oh, I feel so bad for you. Fuck that guy. And then, all of a sudden, in season 3, we're supposed to like him and feel sorry for him because he got his hand cut off and told a nice little story about what really happened with the Mad King. Sorry, I am not fucking buying it. I still hate this guy. The way it was done in the show was so artificial. It was like the showrunners were trying to shove Jaime down the audience's throat and be like him, he's good now, he's good. And my natural reaction is to spit him out and go, no, fuck you, I don't like him. The show just went too far to both extremes, first in making him an insufferable prick, and then making him this heroic good guy all of a sudden. It was a transformation that was totally fake, and I didn't buy it for 1 second. Whereas in the books, he didn't really transform all that much, as he wasn't really that bad of a guy in the first place. We just didn't know the full story behind him, and when he did become good, the books didn't overdo it like the show did and tried to make him come off as some sort of hero. He still had a lot of egotistical qualities, you just understood him better. Also, the scene where Jaime was telling Brienne about what happened with the Mad King was so much less effective in the show, because for one, Jaime had already mentioned this in season 1 with his chat to Robert, so even as someone who hadn't read the books, this wasn't news to me. And for 2, this ties in with my number 1 thing I felt the books did better than the show in season 1, and that is how they handled the history and backstory, whereas in the show was very disconnected from the backstory, like Robert's rebellion. And unlike the books, which did a good job of integrating the backstory into the current story, I did not give a rat's ass about how justified Jaime was in killing the Mad King, because that had nothing to do with him throwing Bran out of the window or killing his own cousin or being such an egotistical jackass. Okay, so now on to my number 2, which is Grey Wind's heroic death. In the show, Grey Wind was trapped in a cage when the Red Wedding happened, and he was just shot with a bunch of arrows and killed while trapped in the cage. Whereas in the books, it is said that he was loose and was going around killing a bunch of Freys while, the Red Wedding happened, and was eventually killed in a battle, taking a good number of Freys with him. That's the kind of glorious death Grey Wind deserved. I know I just earlier praised the show for making the Red Wedding more tragic, and I firmly stand by that praise, but killing Grey Wind all tragic like that is a bit overboard. It's not really necessary. Having Grey Wind go out heroically is still tragic. It just gives a glimmer of satisfaction. Can't you just give us that much? Not only that, but in the books, Grey Wind was like freaking out and growling at the Freys the whole time he was there. He knew something was up, and that was another nice touch that was missing from the show. And my number 1 thing I felt the books did better than the show is in season 3 was that there was far too much filler in the show. This is a major complaint I have about season 3 in general, is that there was far too much filler and it was far too slow. I had a friend who quit watching the show in season 3 because it was just too boring and nothing was happening. This was especially disappointing to me because I had a friend who read the books telling me A Storm of Swords was the best book, and therefore since season 3 is based off of that book, it was going to be the best season. Plus Dan and Dave said in interviews that season 3 is the season they've been waiting for, the one they're most excited to make. So I was all pumped and waiting for something great to happen. But what I got instead was a bunch of boring and bloated filler about who's going to marry who, about Theon being tortured like forever, Robb standing around looking at chess pieces, the showrunners trying to shove Jaime down my throat, and Osha and Mira constantly bitching at each other. And then there's Stannis, who's probably the worst offender of them all, as he sat around Dragonstone doing absolutely nothing all season long, and it's just like, go do something, god damn it. Look, I don't want to see any comments claiming I don't appreciate drama or intrigue at all, and all I want is action. If that's what you think, you haven't been listening to a word I've been saying. I love drama and intrigue. Some of the dialogue scenes between Cersei and Ned, or Littlefinger and Varys, or Lady Olenna and any freaking buddy are my favorite kind of scenes in the entire show. But season 3 just had far too much of it, and it wasn't counterbalanced with enough things actually happening. I remember several people being disappointed at how slow season 3 was, but I remember telling them it was probably because of the split of Storm of Swords was split into 2 seasons, and this was the first half. All the good stuff was probably going to come in season 4 that covered the second half, and although this was before I had read any of the books, I'd say I was pretty much right. After I read the books, I noticed that a lot of the pacing issues in season 3 were due to them splitting the book over 2 seasons, and because they had certain beats they wanted to hit at the end of the season, like the Red Wedding, this led to them spinning their wheels on certain plot lines to wait for this to happen. In other cases, this led to a few wheel-spinning moments in Season 4. At any rate, needless to say, the books didn't have these pacing issues or any of this unnecessary filler that the show had, because they messed up the order of events, and that created some gaps that had to be filled with a lot of slow, uninteresting filler, making this my number 1 thing I felt the books did better than the show in season 3. So that's it for my season 3 book to show comparison. Be sure to check out my channel for many other Game of Thrones videos. I'll eventually be doing a book to show comparison video for season 4 and season 5 as well. So make sure you subscribe to keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.